The email notification chimed at exactly 10:14 on a Tuesday morning, slicing through the thick, stagnant silence of the open plan office. I remember looking at the timestamp and feeling a strange, involuntary shiver, the kind that usually warns you of a drop in temperature even though the thermostat was set to a stifling 72 degrees. Subject: mandatory all-hands meeting room B now. I stared at the screen. My fingers were hovering over the keyboard, mid-samptics, suspended over a line of code that was supposed to fix a critical bug in the payment gateway. I had been wrestling with that specific block of logic for 3 hours, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the desperate adrenaline-soaked fear of missing a deadline that was entirely arbitrary but treated as gospel by the people upstairs. Room B was the conference room with the frosted glass walls, the one usually reserved for client celebrations or aggressive strategy sessions. It wasn't big enough for all hands. That was the first detail that didn't sit right. It felt cramped just thinking about it. I looked around. Other heads were popping up from behind monitors, like prairie dogs. Sensing a predator, eyes met across the dividers, confusion, irritation, and a subtle creeping dread. We were all busy. We were all behind schedule. Nobody had time for a meeting, especially one called with zero notice. I saved my work, pushed my chair back, and stood up. My knees popped. I felt heavy, exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix. This was the fatigue of sustained months-long stress, the kind that settles in your marrow. Walking to the conference room, I fell into step beside a UI designer I worked with occasionally. She gave me a tight, grim smile but didn't say a word. The air in the hallway felt thin. When we squeezed into room B, the atmosphere was sucked out of the room instantly. The VP of operations stood at the head of the table. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't making eye contact. He was staring at a spot on the back wall, his hands clasped behind his back in a pose that was meant to look authoritative, but just looked rigid. I leaned against the back wall, crossing my arms over my chest to hide the fact that my hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear exactly, but from a sudden crash in adrenaline. "Thank you all for coming," the VP said. His voice was flat, rehearsed. "As you know, the market has been volatile. We've had to make some strategic realignments to ensure the long-term viability of the company." I stopped listening to the words and started listening to the tone. It was the corporate funeral voice. I knew what was coming before he said it. I looked at the faces around me, colleagues I'd spent 12 hours a day with, people whose kids' names I knew, people I'd shared takeout pizza with at midnight while we crunched for a release. "Effective immediately," he continued. "Not blinking. Your positions have been eliminated. Today is your last day." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a person. It wasn't quiet. It was the absence of sound, a vacuum where breath and heartbeats used to be. "Please return to your desks, pack your personal belongings, and hand in your badges and laptops to HR, who are waiting by the exits. You have 30 minutes. 30 minutes. I had given this company 2 years of my life. I had missed birthdays. I had canceled vacations. I had worked through the flu, typing with a fever, because the client really needs this feature. And now, my entire tenure, my loyalty, my sacrifice, was being liquidated in a 30-minute window. I walked back to my desk in a daze. The panic hadn't fully hit me yet. It was hovering on the periphery, a dark cloud waiting to burst. Right now, I just felt a bizarre sense of dislocation, as if I were watching myself from the ceiling. I grabbed a cardboard box from the pile someone had dumped near the printer. It smelled like dust and cheap adhesive. I took a Sharpie from my desk cup and, in a moment of bitter, quiet rebellion, wrote Xbox on the side in jagged, angry letters. I started clearing my desk, a framed photo of my dog, a stress ball shaped like a grenade, a stack of technical manuals I'd bought with my own money because the company wouldn't approve the expense. As I was unplugging my mechanical keyboard, I felt a shadow fall over my workspace. I didn't want to look up. I knew who it was. I could smell the overpowering cologne before I saw the cheap suit. Before we jump into the next part, if you're enjoying this story, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm you want to see more content like this. It really helps the channel. Anyway, back to the action. It was John. John was my manager, a title that in his case was purely decorative. He was a man who seemed to view technology as a form of dark magic, something he didn't understand, didn't want to understand, but wanted to control. Over the last year, he had asked me questions that revealed a depth of technical illiteracy so profound it was almost impressive. He didn't know the difference between a server and a database. He thought the cloud was a literal satellite network we owned. He was a conduit for pressure from the sales team, amplifying their demands and filtering out any logic or pushback I tried to offer. He never had my back, not once. When deadlines were missed because of his scope creep, I was the scapegoat. When things went well, he was the visionary. I kept packing, tossing a stapler into the box with more force than necessary. "Hey," John said. His voice was uncomfortably casual, as if I hadn't just been fired in a room full of strangers. I stopped holding a half-empty mug of coffee. I turned to look at him. He looked nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He wasn't looking me in the eye. He was looking at the box. So, he started clearing his throat. "Rough news, huh?" I stared at him. The sheer audacity of the understatement made my jaw clench. "You could say that, John." "Yeah. Listen," he leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I know this is not ideal, but I was talking to the higher-ups. We're in a bit of a bind with the app." I blinked. The app. The project I had single-handedly built from the ground up, the tangled mess of spaghetti code I had spent months refining into something functional, despite John's constant interference. "The app," I repeated, my voice flat.
Right.
John said, nodding vigorously. "See, you're the only one who really knows the guts of it, the coding stuff. And we have that demo with the investors next week. We can't really present it without the final modules being integrated." He paused, waiting for me to solve his problem. When I didn't speak, he continued. "So I was thinking, would you be interested in staying on, on a contract basis? Just until the app is finished, we could work something out." I felt the room spin slightly. I looked at the security guard waiting by the elevator, checking his watch. I looked at my badge, which was about to become a worthless piece of plastic. I hadn't even left the building yet. The body wasn't even cold, and John was asking me to perform CPR. A wave of emotions crashed over me. First, confusion. Was he serious? Did he not understand how layoffs worked? Then anger, a hot, searing flash of rage. They had just told me I was redundant. They had cut my lifeline, taken away my health care, and humiliated me. And now, 5 minutes later, they were admitting they couldn't function without me. And finally, exhaustion. I just wanted to go home. "You want me to contract for you," I said slowly, testing the words to see if they sounded as insane out loud as they did in my head. "To do the job you just fired me from." "Well, when you put it like that," John gave a nervous chuckle, "it's an opportunity to keep some cash flow coming in while you look for something else. It helps us. It helps you." I looked at his face. He really believed that. He thought he was doing me a favor. "I need to go, John," I said, picking up my box. "Just think about it." He called after me as I started walking toward the elevators. "I'll talk to management. I'll call you in a few days." I didn't look back. I walked past the security guard, handed over my badge without a word, and walked out into the bright, blinding sunlight of the parking lot. I drove home in silence, no radio, no podcasts, just the sound of the tires on the pavement and the wind rushing past the windows. When I got to my apartment, I put the box on the kitchen table and collapsed onto the sofa. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Panic began to set in. Real panic. I did the math in my head. I had some savings, but not enough. Rent was due in 2 weeks. Car insurance. Groceries. The safety net I thought I had was thinner than I realized. But amidst the panic, there was relief. A deep physical release of tension. I didn't have to go back there tomorrow. I didn't have to listen to John ask me if we could just add a button that does everything. I didn't have to participate in the charade anymore. The next few days were a blur. I updated my resume, which felt like writing an obituary for my past self. I scoured job boards, feeling the soul-crushing repetitiveness of cover letters. I am a passionate self-starter. I thrive in fast-paced environments. Lying felt necessary. I was sitting at my computer, refreshing my email for the 100th time, when my phone rang. The caller ID said John. I stared at the phone. My heart did a painful thump against my ribs. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail. Part of me wanted to pick up and scream at him until my voice gave out. I took a deep breath, composed myself, and answered, "Hello? Hey, it's John." He sounded breathless, excited. "I have good news. I spoke to the directors. They agreed to bring you back as a contractor to finish the build. We can offer you your old hourly rate, prorated." He said it like he was handing me a winning lottery ticket, my old rate. The rate that I had accepted 2 years ago, when I was desperate and less experienced. The rate that hadn't increased despite my workload tripling. I sat there holding the phone, looking out the window at the gray sky. I thought about the stress. I thought about the Xbox. I thought about the sheer disrespect of being fired and rehired in the same breath. I opened my mouth to tell him to go to hell. I wanted to burn the bridge. I wanted to pour gasoline on it and light a match. But my brain was tired, and my bank account was staring at me from the other monitor. "I can't do it for that amount," I said. The words came out before I fully processed them. It wasn't a shout. It was quiet, defeated almost. "Oh," John said, the excitement vanished from his voice. Well, what were you thinking? I mean, it's a fair offer." It wasn't a fair offer, it was an insult, but I didn't say that. Panic was rising in my throat. I shouldn't be negotiating. I should take what I could get. I was unemployed. I had no leverage. They held all the cards. "I would need more," I said. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. "How much more?" John asked. He sounded impatient now, stressed. "We're on a tight budget here. The layoffs, you know." "Double," I said. The word hung in the air. "Double?" I squeezed my eyes shut. I had lost my mind. I had actually lost my mind. I was self-sabotaging. I was throwing away a lifeline out of pure, petty spite. I expected him to laugh. I expected him to hang up. I braced myself for the rejection, for the validation that I was worthless and replaceable. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear John breathing. I could hear the faint hum of the office in the background. The office I wasn't allowed to enter anymore. "Double," John repeated. His voice was faint. "You want double your previous rate?" "Yes," I said. My hand was shaking. "I'm a contractor now, John. Taxes, overhead, insurance, and the timeline you're asking for, it's going to require overtime. Significant overtime, so yes, double." I was making it up as I went along. I was terrified. "Okay," John said. "Okay, I don't think they're going to go for that. There's no way, but I'll ask." "You let me know what they say," I said and hung up. I dropped the phone on the desk as if it were hot. "Idiot," I whispered to the empty room. "You absolute idiot." I paced around my apartment for an hour. I cleaned the kitchen counters until they sparkled. I walked the dog until he refused to take another step. I had blown it. I had let my pride get in the way of survival. But then, something strange happened. I got an email. Not from John, from a recruiter I had spoken to 3 days prior. Subject: interview request, senior developer role. It was a company I had admired for years, a company with a reputation for treating people like human beings, not code dispensers. They wanted to see me tomorrow. The fear in my chest loosened, just a fraction. The interview the next day was different. It wasn't an interrogation, it was a conversation. We talked about architecture, about philosophy, about the mistakes I'd made and what I'd learned from them. I met the team. They were smiling. Genuine smiles, not the grimaces of people holding back a scream. I walked out of that office feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I was going to get an offer. And I knew it was going to be better than anything John could scrape together. 2 days later, the phone rang again. It was John. I looked at the screen. I felt calm this time. The desperation was gone. The fear was gone. "Hello, John." "You're not going to believe this," John said. He sounded triumphant. He sounded like a man who had pulled a rabbit out of a hat and expected applause. "I went to bat for you. I really pushed. It wasn't easy, let me tell you. I had to call in some favors. He paused for effect. They agreed. Double the rate, we're sending over the contract now. When can you start? We really need to get moving on the payment module. He waited. He expected thank you. He expected you saved me. He expected me to be grateful for the privilege of fixing their mess at a premium price. And for a split second I thought about it. The money would be incredible. It was a staggering amount of cash for a few months of work. But then I remembered the Xbox. I remembered the mandatory meeting. I remembered the years of John asking me to make the font pop. And I looked at the offer letter from the new company that had just landed in my inbox an hour ago. Better benefits, better culture, and a salary that proved they respected me. John, I said softly, yeah, you there? I'm here. Listen, thank you for going to bat for me. I appreciate it. No problem, no problem. So, can you come in tomorrow morning to sign the paperwork? No, John, I can't. There was a pause, a confused silence. What do you mean you have a conflict tomorrow? We can do Monday. No, I said. I mean, I can't take the job. But, John sputtered. But you said double. We gave you double. We gave you exactly what you asked for? I know, I said, and I appreciate that, but I've accepted another offer. You? What? I have another job, John. But we need this done. His voice rose an octave, cracking with panic. The facade of the benevolent manager crumbled instantly. The investors are coming next week. Nobody else knows the code. You can't just leave us hanging like this. I didn't leave you hanging, John, I said. My voice steady and cold. You fired me. Remember? That was just business. We're offering you a fortune. It's not about the money anymore, I said. I could hear him hyperventilating on the other end. I could visualize the sweat beading on his forehead. He was realizing in real time that his safety net was gone. He was realizing that he was going to have to stand in front of those investors and explain why the app didn't work, and he wouldn't have me there to blame or to fix it. I have to go, John. Good luck with the demo. Wait, we can. I hung up. I sat there for a moment, listening to the silence of my apartment. It didn't feel stagnant anymore. It felt peaceful. I realized then that the transaction wasn't just about labor and money. It was about dignity. For 2 years I had sold my dignity cheap. I had let them convince me that I was lucky to be there, that their disorganization was my emergency. Asking for double wasn't greed. It was a test. I wanted to see if they valued me, and when they finally did, when they finally put a price tag on my worth that matched reality, it was too late, because I had finally learned to value myself more than their validation. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. The Xbox was still on the table. I grabbed a pair of scissors and cut the tape. I took out the picture of my dog and placed it on the counter. I took out the stress ball and tossed it in the trash. I didn't need it anymore. A few weeks later, I heard from a friend who still worked in the industry. He told me that the company had scrambled to hire a contractor at the last minute. A guy named Mike, a good friend of mine actually. They paid him a fortune, but he was walking into a burning building. Mike called me a few days into the job, sounding panicked. He couldn't make heads or tails of the documentation John had provided, which was non-existent. I don't know what to do, man, Mike said. John is breathing down my neck. He says this is all simple stuff. I sighed. I looked at my new workstation, at the Slack messages from my new team asking for my opinion on a design choice, treating me like a partner. I could have told Mike to figure it out himself. I could have let the old company burn to the ground, let John face the consequences of his incompetence fully and completely. But Mike was my friend, and he was just another developer trying to pay his bills. Open the main repository, I told Mike. Look at the legacy pay-in controller file. The bug isn't in the code, it's in the way the database is indexed. John insisted we use a deprecated format 3 months ago. I commented it out, but you need to toggle the flag on line 402. Oh my God, Mike said. I see it. You just saved my life. Don't worry about it, I said. Just make sure you bill them for every single hour. And Mike? Yeah? Get the money up front? I hung up the phone and turned back to my work. The old company was a ghost now, a story to tell at bars, a lesson learned in the hard way. I checked the stock market ticker a few months later out of idle curiosity. The graph was a steep, jagged red line, plunging downward into oblivion. I closed the tab. I had code to write.